Well, we have an amazing guest with an amazing book. And if I got this right, it's already a bestseller. It's number 37 on the list. The last time I checked, it could have gone up since the last time I've looked. But we're with the author J. Robert Gould, who has written The Last of the Greatest Generation, a World War II mystery that divided two nations. Welcome to our podcast, Jay.
Well, Zach, I really appreciate you having me.
This is one of my favorite subjects, World War II. Before we started our segment this morning, I gave you a little bit of background about
Right.
my connection to World War II and the people that surrounded me growing up. They made an amazing impact on my life, which I think bears fruit to this day. And I'm teaching some of those types of values to my own daughter. And as a result, I have to say my daughter is tougher than most guys I know, yet retains her femininity. It's a nice balance. She's very feminine. She's total girl, but don't mess with her because she will tear your throat out. You know,
Well,
that's
good
my mom.
job.
Yeah. What is the last of the greatest generation about?
It's about is you had inferred it when we got the introduction. It's about a World War II veteran who happens to be the last World War II veteran alive. And it is also brings into focus kind of a love story. It brings together a what I would call a reporter who's been down on his luck through a tragedy that gets the opportunity to do this interview with this last living World War II veteran. And as it turns out, he thinks it's just a simple little interview that he'll do and write an article about it, and that would be the end of it. But through an investigation, he starts to find out that this last veteran is more than just the last living veteran. He happens to also have a secret, a mystery that kind of unfolds as the story unfolds. So it's kind of a fast paced, who done it kind of thing. As I said, it brings in a number of characters. There's a little love story that's involved in it, but it's really about as I said, the last living veteran who happens to be, his name is Papa John. And so it's kind of a very interesting story. At one point, Zachary, there was going to be a last living veteran. So it kind of foretells perhaps a story about, who this person will be.
Yes, you're right about that. In fact, I just read the other day, maybe last week or two, the last survivor of the Pearl Harbor attack on USS
Yeah.
Arizona passed away. And there's also something interesting that comes into play with a lot of the World War II veterans. I myself served as a hospice chaplain. I'm a member of the American Legion. And I would talk to a lot of these veterans as, they were getting to that transition moment of their life, going to the, heaven, so to speak, getting ready
Mhm.
for their eternal life. And the stories were always riveting to me. Some were sad because they were reliving what they thought were moments of World War II that were going on in their life immediately. I had to learn how to help them out of that by telling them the commanding officer said that they don't have to go to the front anymore. They're being discharged. And the answer was, oh, thank God. The horrors of World War II, the horrors of battle are something that never really goes away. And then there was always one or two that caught me off guard or made a connection with a history that we had in common, whether it was serving in the same infantry unit years apart, 40 or 50 years apart, whether it was serving at the same bases, or whether they were telling me secrets that they were supposed to keep for 60 to 70 years, I suppose. One being with the real quick, and then we'll get to Papa John. My Uncle Pete played baseball growing up, and he had this landscaping company. He was not in World War II, but he served towards the mid to late 50s. And some of the people he served with were famous baseball players at Camp Kilmore in Edison, New Jersey. And last year, a couple years before he died last year, at the age of 86, he was telling me how my grandfather was friends with Babe Ruth. I'm like, thanks for letting me know 60 years after the fact. He's got the signed baseball. And then I don't know what made me decide to ask him this. I go, Uncle Pete, what did you do before you were a landscaper? He goes, oh, I worked at Bendix on nuclear weapons. I'm like, oh gosh. And it occurred to me that a lot of these guys, when they were told to keep it classified, kept it classified. Maybe forever, they took it to their grave, some of these stories, or maybe after time elapsed, they figured there's no secrets to keep at this point because everybody knows and they're aware. The mystery that you talk about in this novel, is it something to do with military secret or military intrigue?
It is. It is. Although I don't want to give the the ending away, but it involves actually two nations: Japan, as you might guess, and the United States. And there is a kind of a mystery that has divided these two nations since the end of the war. And Papa John happens to be that catalyst that reunites these two nations by virtue of him having obtained something that was sacred to the Japanese empire, to the Japanese people. Through the discovery that this reporter goes through, he finds what those are. So it's kind of an intrigue that has been a kind of an underlying secret. And once the story evolves, and much to what you described, the government starts to get involved with that because it is something that has been an undercurrent for all these years, all these generations, that now has begun to kind of come to the surface. And so it's kind of an interesting and exciting story, compelling to have these two countries who were enemies for the time during World War II then work together to kind of discover what was missing in the Japanese dynasty, and then kind of reunite that to the rightful owners.
We're talking with author J. Robert Gould, the writer of The Last of the Greatest Generations. We talk about a character called Papa John. I would like to know, who is the inspiration for this novel, Jay?
Well, it's Papa John is actually my father-in-law, who was named, we called him Papa John. He served on the USS Ticonderoga during the war, and has always told me these stories, Zachary, about his time on the ship, his time in Japan when the occupational forces came in after the surrender. And these stories were always very interesting and very compelling. And it was actually one evening I was sitting on the porch with my wife, and I'm talking. Your dad's stories are so remarkable, and I'd hate for them to end with us. But what if? And that's where the story kind of took a life of its own. What if he was the last living World War II veteran, the last of the greatest generation, as the title is? And what would happen if? And so this story grew out of that. And I actually showed Papa John, a couple excerpts that come from the book, which are true. There are, obviously, it's a mystery, no doubt, but there are elements of the book in which Papa John was involved in something that are accurate. So it was kind of interesting when he was able to read a chapter and realize, yeah, that's exactly what happened. And so that was kind of a nice thing.
The Ticonderoga, hopefully I said that right. I usually have a problem with pronunciation. That was an aircraft carrier.
Aircraft carrier. That's actually, you're absolutely right.
And what did Papa John do on that aircraft carrier?
Well, he was first of all, he was a scout. In other words, he was kind of looking for the kamikazes that were
Oh,
about.
okay.
And then he had multiple roles. And then he was also responsible for the boilers, the steam room. So he was on occasion down on the seventh deck, working the dials and working the engines.
Well, that's all really cool stuff there. I've been on many of aircraft carriers, ships, and submarines, and I like getting into the guts. I like going into the engine room. I like seeing the torpedo rooms. I'm really all about that. I went to the Marine Academy of Science and Technology as a student and was raised by a lot of naval people. And when I was little, I was in the New Jersey Naval Brigade, and we got to sleep on the USS Massachusetts. To me, that was like the biggest deal to go away and spend time on those trips. And on the other side of the USS Massachusetts is the Joseph P. Kennedy, which my uncle John was an electrician's mate. He served on that ship right around the Cuban Missile Crisis. So it seems like I always grew up around this history and heard these great stories told by the greatest generation ever, these World War II soldiers and sailors. Not to mention the fact that you run into guys who served in the army in the European 30 theater and were in the Battle of the Bulge and were, on Omaha Beach. So these stories are really rich, and I'm thankful that you came up with this concept. This is a genre that is really, I would say, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, great for all ages. I think everybody will be able to take something out of this book.
Well, and this book is for all ages, and you're absolutely right. It is not necessarily a history of the war, but there are elements of the war that add to the story, the kind of the atmosphere. It's a love story in addition to that. It's kind of someone coming to terms with tragedy. So that's a compelling part of it as well. So there's a number of elements in this book I think that will find anybody will find interesting. And again, as I said, I've done the same thing you did, Zachary. I went on a aircraft carrier to kind of get a feel. It's one thing to hear about it in concept. It's another to actually walk where they walked, where my father-in-law walked. I went on the same aircraft carrier, the same type of aircraft carrier that he served. So kind of got to walk in his footsteps. So kind of an interesting perspective.
The Ticonderoga was an Essex class carrier.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, that those are available. I think they're still around some museum ships. One is located in San Diego, the other in North Carolina.
Yeah.
In New York, they have the Intrepid. So anybody that's listening or watching, if you ever get a chance to go to a museum ship, you should definitely go and do that. If you can and you live in close proximity, volunteer your time and talents because it means a world of difference. And what I found about studying World War II in particular, and even the First War and various other things that coincide with military science and naval science, is that war really should be only left when there's no other option. It is definitely not something that anybody wants to be part of, not on purpose anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of theme comes out in the book as well.
I'll give you a pass on the love story in it because Pearl Harbor was ruined by a love story. The Titanic was ruined by a love story. So I guess, hopefully this one makes up for all of those
Well,
films that all of a sudden there's a love story in it. You're like, oh, come on. Nobody had time for any of that stuff.
well, this is probably a part of the story, but it is not the story.
Right.
It's
It
really
doesn't,
about
yeah. It doesn't overtake the story.
no, it doesn't, and that's what I want to reinforce. There is an element of that in it, certainly, but it is not what the story is about. It's really about that mystery that divided the two nations, and about being the last of the greatest generation, and what that meant to Papa John, and kind of what that meant to the country.
I am glad that the United States and Japan have such a close relationship after such a brutal war between two powers. It's amazing how we've come to the point where we really, I think, as countries, genuinely love each other. We've got each other's back. We share baseball
Well,
and more.
exactly. And when you realize that you have more common than difference, you kind of wonder how we get ourselves into these things.
Oh, I can tell you how we get ourselves into these things. These are started by a group of about 5 to 10 people who make us all pay for it in one way or another because they're the ones that cause the problems. But let's make a shift. Let's do something that we normally have never done on any of my interviews with any authors. Would you mind reading a couple of pages from your
Sure,
book?
I'd be happy to. Let me put on my reading glasses. We'll start, actually, we'll go right into the first chapter. How's that,
It's
Zachary?
fantastic.
Okay. John Anderson was in the South Pacific on the aircraft carrier USS Ticonderoga, looking through binoculars as he scanned the skies for kamikaze pilots from the ship's control tower. It was a boring task, but the fear of an attack lingered on the crew's mind. As he lowered his binoculars and looked along the horizon, he reached into his pocket and removed a black and white picture of a young girl. She was beautiful, with light hair and a lovely smile. They had fallen in love and planned on getting married until the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor and changed their plans. "What's her name?" came a voice standing next to him. John hadn't noticed that the ship's captain had joined him on the bridge. "Sir, sorry, I was just looking at my girl," John said as he showed the picture to the captain. "She's beautiful. What's her name?" "Evelyn. Evelyn Hunter. I call her Evie. She's back in Buffalo." "You're lucky to have her, son." "I agree, sir. Probably too good for me." The captain chuckled. John put the picture of the black and white photo in his pocket and raised his binoculars and looked at the empty skies. "Keep your eyes open. These damn kamikazes come from nowhere, and I don't want us to be caught with our pants down, so stay focused. Got it?" "Yes, sir." John continued looking through the binoculars, scanning the empty skies. Suddenly, the captain grabs a bullhorn and yells to a number of sailors setting up 2 large military cannons. "Watch it. What are you doing? We don't need those damn things rolling off the ship." He looked over to John. "I can't believe we put these on the deck. This is a first for an aircraft carrier." A few minutes passed when the captain leans on the rail and looks at Anderson. "Sir, are you ready?" he said. "Sir, about as ready as I'll ever be." "Good, because the ship and crew's lives depend on it. Do you realize that?" "Yes, sir, I do. We won't disappoint you." The captain nodded. "I hope not." He paused. "Son, for now, I'm reassigning you to the 7th deck. I need someone down there to manage the steam thrusters, so head down there when your shift is done." John was walking the flight deck before heading down to his new assignment. He stopped and closed his eyes to feel the mist of the ocean breeze blow and the warmth of the sun on his face. Despite being at war, the moment felt like he was somewhere in the islands with no worries in the world. Suddenly, he felt a thud. "Shit, Anderson. Watch where you're going," said the large burly Marine named Butch. John looked up and squinted. "Sorry, Butch, just walking." "Just keep your eyes open so you don't fall off the deck, because your skinny ass won't be here for long," came a stern reply. "Yeah, well, just keep your fat ass out of the way so you don't block out the sun." Butch's expression took a serious turn. His eyes burned through John until he couldn't contain it. He burst out laughing. "Well, you know, Anderson, it's good that you have at least a few pounds on you so you don't blow off the deck." John put his hands over his eyes to block out the sun that peered over Butch's shoulders. "Nah, I just grab your ass and hang on." Butch chuckled and asked, "Where are you headed?" "7th deck." "Steam room?" "Yeah." "Take care. As you're skinny as you are, they'll probably find you in a puddle." John laughed and shrugged. Butch patted him on the back and headed to the hatch leading to the lower decks. He turned and said, "Anderson, you did well in training. Give 'em hell. Hoo-yah."
That sounds pretty accurate of the type of conversations that we do have on the line, whether it's on land or on a ship. Pretty much you nailed that. Good job. Is this your first book that you've authored, or what
Yes,
else?
this is the first one I've done, and I've kind of toyed with another book that I've got basically on the shelf. But This is the first one I've done, completed, written, and got published.
Wow. For your first work, just amazing, Jay. Just really, how did you learn how to write? In other words, you came up with some dialogue, you painted a picture, you gave us the kind of attitude exactly of what it was like to be on that ship. You can actually smell the paint. You can actually feel what's going on through your writing, and you totally, I anyway, understand that dialogue. And I have a picture in my mind of what it looks like. What were some of the, I guess, inspirations that you used? How did you do this?
Well, there's a couple authors that I really like. David McCullough, John Meacham are both authors who write, nonfiction books. They're historians, basically, and I like their writing. And then I'm a big Clive Cussler fan, who does a pretty good job of writing fiction and the stories. And some of it is just, oftentimes it's better to listen, and you just listen to some of these guys, these World War II veterans that I've had the pleasure of talking to. And then, as you described earlier, walking around the aircraft carrier that was in World War II and feeling that kind of the ambiance in that ship, that kind of makes you wonder what it must have been like. And so a lot of it just kind of came naturally to me. Talking with my father-in-law, who's the inspiration, as I said, of the book, listening to how he talked about his fellow sailors on the Ticonderoga. It just kind of came natural. I'm not saying that it's right or wrong. It just felt comfortable for me when I started writing the book, and the dialogue just fell in place.
Excellent. There is, and you probably would agree with me, there is no smell in the world quite like being on one of those World War II vessels. You have to experience it. There is a smell. I cannot describe it to you, but when you smell it, you're like, wow, it's like getting a new set of tires. You're like, this is, I
It's
like this smell.
You're absolutely right. I had the fortune of going with my brother. We were doing a kind of a southern tour, and we did a couple battleships and obviously the aircraft carrier. And they all smell the same for one reason or another.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's the age, who knows? Maybe it's the history they've gone through. But you're absolutely right. And I think when you walk those ships, or when you walk those battlefields, there is I don't know how to explain it, but you begin to feel what it must have been like. You can't comprehend it, but you have to appreciate it.
You get definitely connected to it. John, where's the last of the greatest generation available?
It is in every bookstore, Barnes and Noble, the Amazon, independent bookstores, online. So I would, encourage people to go there. I can't, before I end, I also want to thank my publisher, Diane Lilly from Rebel Books Press, because she's been instrumental in helping us get this story out to the public. And has made all the connections to do so. So, a shout out to her for helping us, because I really think The Last of the Greatest Generation is a book that everyone would enjoy. Doesn't matter, young, old, been there, done that. It's just a very sweet story, in my opinion, that I think people would find interesting and fun.
It sort of reminds me of a great John Wayne movie, In Harm's Way,
Yeah.
which I suggest people see that. It's fictional, but based on some true characters that existed during World War II, which leads up to the Battle of Leyte Gulf, which is another great, one of the last major surface warfare encounters with the Japanese. And I think if you really love this kind of story and history, you look into that. Maybe you get the book, and you can find out more information at rebelbookspress.com to get The Last of the Greatest Generation. And that will lead to you on an epic journey of discovery, going to Wikipedia and start looking up the ships and start looking up the places and start looking for these various rich stories so that we keep them in our heart and mind and teach future generations. Before we go, Jay, what are some of the when you think of Papa John, your father-in-law? I think he just recently passed away. Did he?
Yeah, he just passed away 1st of March.
Very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
What were like three big takeaways from Papa John that you can share with us that you, if you were talking to your son or daughter or your grandson or great grandson or daughter, that you would like to say what Papa John had to say?
Well, I think, that's a very good question, Zachary. He was sweet. He always felt that he loved everybody. I think the takeaway is you look for the good in everything and you look for the good in everybody, and 90% of the time you're going to find it. He loved to joke. He had a great sense of humor, liked to be involved in the conversation. And he was always cute about, talking about the stories of he and his wife. And I think that's one of the things you find in The Greatest Generation too, is the love for family and wife, and was very, very important. And the other thing that I found in him, and I have subsequently found it in a lot of World War II veterans, is they're just humble. I mean, when you ask about the war and you ask about their involvement, they will shrug and simply say, "That's what I had to do." And they don't ever think of it anything but, "Hey, the country called us to protect freedom. And that's exactly what we did. No big deal."
Get the Big Deal in Books, The Last of the Greatest Generations, available now, all your booksellers. For more information, go to rebelbookspress.com.